It's Adam here for PC Monitors, and in this video I'm going to be taking a look at the OSD on-screen display menu system of the ViewSonic XG270QG. The OSD is controlled by a joystick on the underside of the bottom bezel below the Elite logo. You can see that in the middle there. There's also a power button to the right of that, and to the left of that there is a quick access button which you can configure in the OSD. If you press that quick access button, by default it quickly activates and deactivates the blue light filter setting, and I'll explore that in the main menu system shortly. If you twiddle the joystick left when you're not in any particular menu, you can enter the main menu system. You can also enter that by pressing the joystick in, twiddling it up or twiddling it down. If you twiddle the joystick right, you can quickly select the input used by the monitor, HDMI or DisplayPort. There's also a power indicator LED towards the right side there, and that glows blue when the monitor's on and amber when it's on standby, when it enters a low power state, so signal to the computer is lost. The OSD has quite a stealthy design, as I like to call it, lots of grey and white text. It has some basic information such as the model number, the fact it's a ViewSonic Elite series monitor and it's the XG270QG. It tells you if G-Sync's on, and it tells you the maximum refresh rate, so that's the static refresh rate that you've got selected in Windows or in the application that you're running. It also tells you which game mode you're currently running. So the game modes, they're the presets of the monitor. Standard mode, Custom 1 and Custom 2, they're all fully customizable. By default they have slightly different settings, but you can really use any one of these and just configure things to your liking, and I'll go through that shortly. FPS, this is just factory configured with, you'll see that there isn't any further options under game mode there was before. You can't change various things when you're in the FPS, Battle Royale, MOBA, console, movie or web modes. So that means you have access locked off to all of these settings. So you've got, I'll go through these shortly properly, but dark boost, adaptive contrast, blue light filter, response time. So you don't get full adjustability, and various things such as the dark boost, which is a gamma enhancement feature. I'll talk about that more shortly, but that's set to various different values for the named presets. So for that reason, I don't like the named presets. I don't think there's any point in using them. You should just configure things to your liking manually and use the Custom 1, Custom 2 or Standard presets. So you've got your dark boost setting there. I've got the Lagom black levels test open just to show you what this does. It isn't shown exactly as you'd see it first hand. That's impossible to show in a video, but it will show you the relative effect of dark boost. Level 1 is the weakest effect, and that lightens up these darker shades. It improves the visibility, in other words, and it gives you a competitive edge in games. Level 2 is brighter again. Level 3 is brighter again. Unlike some features of this nature, it doesn't affect your black points, so you don't lose contrast. You can see the background, that's actually pure black. That stays the same regardless. It might appear different in the video, but that's just the compensation done by the camera. In reality, the contrast remains much the same, and you're enhancing the visibility. So things don't look as they should, certainly when you've got dark boost active, and it kind of looks a little bit flooded because of the gamma changing a lot when you've got level 3 in particular, level 2 to a lesser extent, level 1 to a lesser extent. So it's not really meant for a nice looking image, but it is meant to give you a competitive edge if you like that kind of thing in your games. Next is adaptive contrast. That's the dynamic contrast function of the monitor. It's a bit of a peculiar one, this one actually. It doesn't seem to do much to change the backlight brightness. What it does is it changes the gamma, and it's really supposed to change the gamma and backlight brightness according to the level of light or dark on the screen. As usual for such a feature, one backlight controlled as a single unit for the entire screen, so it's just really compensating for the overall levels of light and dark. I don't like the feature. It kind of just messes up the gamma, and it gives you a little bit less control over the brightness. So it's not really something which I find useful. You can adjust the brightness with this active, so you don't lose control of anything on the display settings, including the brightness. I think you might actually lose control of the contrast setting. That might make sense. I'll just check for you. No, you can adjust all of the things on display settings, and I'll come on to this shortly. You might have also noticed I was kind of fumbling a bit in the menu system. I wasn't quite sure which level of the menu I was at. I don't actually like this menu system as much as some in terms of intuitive navigation. I find that it's too subtle. So you can see when you're at the first level, it just highlights that as custom 1. If you press the joystick right, you go to the next level. Press it again, you go to the next level. I kind of find it quite a subtle cue, the little highlights that they give you to show you where you're at. And even worse when you're this deep in, because the only cue you get is the fact that that 0 there has gone white rather than light grey. It's a subtle change, it's not an obvious one, and it's quite easy to lose track of where you are in the menu system. Anyway, moving on. There's blue light filter. I'll just turn this adaptive contrast rubbish off first. Blue light filter. That's a low blue light setting. You can set that from 0 to 100. 0 is deactivated completely. 100 is the strongest setting. And if you use the shortcut key to turn it on, it just puts it straight at 100. I like this setting. I actually like this low blue light setting more than quite a few implementations. What it does is it makes the image appear warmer. It significantly decreases the white point, and it significantly decreases the power of the blue channel. So it decreases the amount of blue light output from the monitor. It's more effective if you're also decreasing the brightness, so you're using a relatively low brightness. That's an important thing to reduce the blue light from the monitor as well. I like to use this in the evening. That's really a particularly important part of when you should use low blue light settings, because that's when your body naturally wouldn't be receiving blue light. So of course in the daytime there's a lot of natural blue light outside, and for those who like to venture outside, so you would naturally be exposed to a lot of this anyway. In the evening, dark outside, your body's supposed to be sort of shutting down a bit, getting ready for bed. You don't want to blast it with blue light. That messes up your sleep hormones, disrupts your sleep. So I like to use this setting. Certainly I find it effective, and my colorimeter seemed to agree. Now the other thing is that it doesn't have an overly obvious green tint. Some low blue light settings introduce an obvious green tint because they don't reduce the green colour channel properly. This one is much better balanced. Actually, the balance of the image is quite good. Yes, it does appear warmer, but your eyes kind of adjust to that over time, and it doesn't have an obvious green tint, which your eyes find it harder to adjust to, so it's actually quite a nice setting in my opinion. I also like that it's very easy to disable it and enable it with just one button. Next, there's response time OD, the overdrive setting of the monitor. Standard, advanced, ultra fast, they're explored in the review, the different settings there. I personally like the standard setting the best. Recall, which will just set everything on this game mode menu back to the factory defaults, or more to the point, it'll actually reset the game mode you're using, so custom 1, custom 2 or standard, where you can configure these individually. It'll reset them to the factory defaults. Next, there's display. So there's overclocking, and what that does is it allows you to activate the 165Hz refresh rate, and it'll add that to your resolution list in Windows and for your games, etc. Or native means it'll cap out at 144Hz instead. You can adjust the contrast, you can adjust the brightness, saturation. This is set to 100 by default. That's the best balance, you get the best shade variety. If you increase this, what it does is it pulls shades close to the edge of the gamut without expanding the gamut itself. So it basically gives a very cartoonish look to things, especially if you have a mega increase here, and it reduces your shade variety. If you decrease this lower than 100, you start to lose saturation. Because this monitor has a generous colour gamut, well beyond sRGB, some users might like to actually decrease the saturation a little bit just to take a bit of the edge off, but I find it actually subdues some shades too much, whereas others remain quite saturated until you reduce it to the extent where really things look quite washed out and a little bit odd in terms of the balance. But do have a play with this if you want. Another nice thing about this monitor is it has 6-axis colour control. This is actually saturation as well, but you can address the saturation of the red, green, blue, cyan, magenta and yellow individually. So if you're finding that reds are a bit too fiery, you can just reduce them a bit. But note that it will have an effect on other shades, because lots of shades contain red, even if you might not necessarily expect it. So again, it's difficult to achieve a really good balance in my opinion by doing this, but some users might find it nice. It takes a little bit of an edge off the saturation if you're finding it too strong. Next, there's color temperature. So you can choose sRGB, bluish, native, warm or user color. sRGB is not an sRGB emulation mode on this monitor. All it does is it has a lower default brightness and it just uses the native color controls, the same as native here. And that is the same as setting user color to red 100, green 100 and blue 100. So the warm setting is a little bit different. It's kind of like a slightly weaker low blue light setting than the full low blue light setting of the monitor, but it still works as a low blue light setting if for whatever reason you can't be bothered to use the slider or the little button to activate that, which would be extremely lazy in my opinion. But this is just an alternative low blue light setting basically. And bluish, which makes everything look cool, and not cool in a good way, cool as in a very high white point and just looks dodgy to be honest. And then there's user color, which allows you to manually adjust the red, green and blue colour channels, the gains of those channels. There's then input range, so you can set the signal to full range or limited range. You can manually select that, or you can have it automatically selected based on your source. There's a gamma setting, you can change that between 1.8 and 2.6 in increments of 0.2. The default 2.2, and according to my measurements, at least on my unit, the gamma was spot on where it said it should be with these various different settings, so that was good to see. Scaling mode, 1:1, fixed aspect or full screen. This only applies if you're using HDMI, because as a G-Sync monitor you don't get any scaling features when you're using the G-Sync board, which is when you're using DisplayPort. However, if you're using HDMI, you can select 1:1, the pixel mapping feature. So that'll only use the pixels called for in the source resolution, and then it'll give you a black border for the rest of the image. So if you're running full HD, for example, you'd have a kind of fairly small image in the center of the screen, completely undistorted. Whereas if you select the full screen option, which is the default, I believe it should be the default anyway, that will fill out the screen completely and use all of the pixels, but you'll be using an interpolation process and you get a bit of softening. That's explored in the written review. And there's fixed aspect ratio, which will maintain an appropriate aspect ratio based on the source resolution, but use a bit of interpolation. Next is input select. That's pretty straightforward. It allows you to select HDMI or DisplayPort. Audio adjust, you can adjust the volume of the integrated speakers or mute them, or anything connected to the 3.5mm jack if you're using that. Next, the setup menu, you can change the language that the OSD is displayed in. A resolution notice, so that just gives you a message on the screen when it's not running at a native resolution. Information gives you basic information, such as the resolution, the maximum refresh rate, so that's the static refresh rate you've selected in Windows, whether G-Sync is active or ULMB is active, or if you've got neither active, so then it will just say normal or something like that. The model number, which is a code that ViewSonic used for the model. It's not something which most users will really need to pay much attention to. A reminder that ViewSonic's website is www.viewsonic.com, and the version number. The version number, I assume that's the firmware number that you're using, the revision. Mine is 1.8. This is a pre-release sample, a very early one, so perhaps your one will be a bit later than that. Next, there's quick access, so you can change what that quick access button does, the first button there. Blue light filter, I actually like it set to that. You can have ULMB selected, although for this you would need to have the monitor running at 120 Hz or 100 Hz or 85 Hz. So I've got ULMB selected as well. You'll see that you can have multiple things. You can have up to 3 things here selected, so the quick access will cycle through them. But just note that if you've got multiple things selected, you can't then use it to toggle the blue light filter on and off quickly. It's something which you'd have to cycle through various times, if that makes sense. So I'll just show you. I've got ULMB standard and blue light filter, standard being the standard preset. So now if I press the button, it activates the standard mode. Press it again, activates the blue light filter. Press it again, it would have activated ULMB if I was actually at an appropriate refresh rate. Then again, blue light filter on. And the remaining options there, custom 1, custom 2, so you can change to a different preset quickly or cycle between different presets quickly if that's what you prefer to do. So ULMB, I didn't show you before, but in the game mode settings, menu, there's a little grayed out bit there, ULMB and ULMB pulse width. This is all explored in the written review. I'm not going to bother showing you this, but if I were to change the refresh rate to 120, 100 or 85 Hz and I had G-Sync deactivated, I'd be able to use this. And specifically if I had ULMB activated in NVIDIA control panel as well, that would make sense. I'd be able to activate this, and the pulse width setting is related to the brightness, but I would just refer to the written review for an explanation of ULMB and what these specific settings do. Next, there's Crosshair. You can activate the on-screen Crosshair. There's 3 different types. So there's this one there, that design, type B, type C, which is just a simple little dot. So I'll just select that for now. And that'll put a little dot in the middle of the screen. You can see the little dot on the head of the butterfly there. That's green because that's the colour I had selected. You can change that to a different colour if you prefer. So you can have it green, white or yellow. So I'll just show you type A in white. So that's a bit of a clearer design there. Or you can reset this so it resets the crosshair to the factory defaults, which would be off. It resets the type to A, I assume, and the colour to green, because they were the defaults. Next, there's Elite RGB. So this feature RGB LED lighting on the monitor. So it has some LEDs beneath the monitor and also a ring of LEDs at the back. Actually, I think it's a hexagon, I can't quite remember. But I'll show you the back and the LEDs themselves shortly. But what this does is it gives you a little bit of an aura around the monitor. You can see that there. So by default, the setting is to cycle a rainbow of different colours, a spectrum of colours. It's what ViewSonic calls rainbow as the effect. So you can control what the rear is doing and what the base is doing. There's a rainbow effect, breathing, which is a different one. I'll set them both to breathing so it's clear what it's doing. So you can see it's now pulsing. It's just an animation. It's a blue colour. It doesn't cycle various different colours. Or there's stack, which is another animation pattern. So you'll notice from this, you can't set it to a static colour. You can't choose the colour itself. There's just various different things it'll do, different animation patterns. I think rainbow is probably the most interesting thing you can make it do in the OSD. And that's because what ViewSonic actually wants you to do is use software to control it. So if you go to ViewSonic's website, www.viewsonic.com/elite/RGB, as shown in the address bar there. I'm not sure if the camera will pick that up, but that's what I've typed in here. You can go onto the RGB Alliance page, which gives you information about how to actually use this and the software you can use with this. At the moment, there are 3 different implementations, 3 different software packages you can use. Just be aware that Razer Chroma and Thermaltake's RGB Plus software, you actually need either a Razer Chroma peripheral or an RGB Plus peripheral to use them. I think the Razer Chroma software uses something called Razer Synapse, and I did try that before, didn't work, and that's because I don't have any Razer Chroma peripherals, and I don't have any Thermaltake RGB Plus peripherals either, so that would be leaving the Master Plus, which is a Cooler Master solution software available to use. Now, the problem I have, so I've got the software installed, you also have to have the USB cable connected, USB 3 upstream, from the system to the monitor. However, when I run this, it just says compatibility. Very useful error message there. I'm assuming it's telling me that the monitor isn't compatible with the software, and I can only assume, because I have set everything up correctly. I've actually used this on another monitor before, the ViewSonic XG270R, and I know this works and I know how to set it up. So I can only assume it's because I'm using a pre-release sample and it hasn't been added to the list of officially supported devices for the software yet. So that's a bit unfortunate. So I can't actually show you the software, but all I'd recommend doing, and if you are interested in this, I'd recommend going to what I'd recommend doing if you're interested in this feature, go to our OSD video, ViewSonic XG240 menu system, in brackets OSD, for the ViewSonic XG240R. If you go 1 minute 40 into the video, that's the start of when I go through the Elite RGB feature of that monitor. It's basically a similar implementation. The difference here is there are LEDs on the bottom as well as on the back. So you can see it is reasonably bright on this monitor. I'm sorry that I can't go through the software and show you the functionality, but what I could do on the when I tested it previously on the other monitor, I could change to a static color. So I could use it as a bias light, for example, just a static cool or warm white. And I actually quite liked doing that if my room was a bit dimmer. I don't generally game in a room or use the monitor in a room that's this dim, but I did notice that the RGB lighting was brighter than some implementations. It's not the brightest. I mean, you can see here, you can see an aura around the monitor. So it's bright enough to be seen, and the fact that it has LEDs on the bottom as well sort of helps it stand out a bit. Certainly better than some implementations where you'd have to actually be looking at the rear of the monitor to see anything. So it's more useful than that kind of implementation. Can be used as a kind of bias light. It's not super strong, but you can use it as that. So that's nice. So I'll show you the LEDs themselves. You can see there are 5 there and 5 there on the bottom of the bezel. And around the back, there is a hexagon. I think it's a hexagon. Like a little ring, hexagonal ring around the stand base attachment point. So with the software, you should be able to control those, not just as 1, 2, 3 zones, but actually it would probably allow finer control. I'm pretty sure it would, just based on what I saw with the XG240R, and that had even fewer LEDs. So you should be able to set various different zones and have them doing different patterns, different colors, whatever you want, or you can just use it as a static kind of bias light type feature. Next is OSD timeout, and that allows you to change the period in seconds, after which the OSD will automatically disappear. So you can set that between 0 and 60 seconds. Or you can just press the exit button there. So that's the first button, what was the quick access when you're outside of the main menu system, to exit the OSD on your own. OSD background, so you can have a kind of transparent effect if you prefer. I find this pretty difficult to read, to be honest, so I tend not to like that on. I just have it as an opaque background instead. Power indicator, so that little power LED there, if it's bothering you whilst the monitor's switched on, you can have that switched off instead. This is a kind of basic flexibility I think they should have on all monitors, but surprisingly enough, not all monitors do allow you to do that. Standby charger, so that allows you to use the USB ports of the monitor to charge devices which you've got connected, even if the monitor is in a low power state. So that means if you press the power button to turn the monitor off, it would be able to charge devices connected to the USB ports. You can set the monitor to sleep after a given amount of time, so it'll put itself in a low power state after a time you select here, if you want to do that. Oops, I don't want to do that, and I've accidentally selected 45 minutes. That would have been annoying for me. Deep sleep, HDMI deep sleep or DisplayPort deep sleep. So what this does is a part of the Energy Star compliance, and it's on by default. What that means is it uses fractionally less power when the monitor goes to sleep. So that is to say when the signal to the computer is lost. So if you do send your computer to sleep and you find that the monitor is not waking up properly, that might be because you've got deep sleep enabled. If you disable it, it will use fractionally more power if the signal is lost and the monitor just enters a low power state automatically, but it might mean that it wakes up a bit better from the sleep, from your system's sleep, if that makes sense. There's eco mode, and what that does is it sets the brightness to a factory defined value. Standard, optimize or conserve, various different values. Standard is the brightest, and I don't know exactly what brightness that sets it to. I'll just quickly check. 100, so that's full brightness when you've got that set to standard. It's a little bit awkward to show you this and keep going to the brightness control as well, but I'll do my best. Optimize, that's somewhat dimmer. So that is now at 75, so it's just slightly dimmer. Or there is conserve, that's dimmer again, and that is set to 50. As I show you in the written review, I would prefer to set it to 30, that's my preferred setting for brightness, but you have to set it according to your own preferences and lighting conditions, but really the eco mode is quite a limited feature and it's not particularly useful in my opinion. You might as well just adjust the brightness manually, you get more control and can do whatever you want there. Memory recall, that'll set everything to the factory defaults. So that's really all there is to the OSD on-screen display menu system of the ViewSonic XG270QG. Be sure to check out the full review on pcmonitors.info. There's a link to that in the description of the video, alongside information about how you can support the work that we do.